Welcome to Fit Strong Women Over 50 podcast, episode 134. Hi, I'm Jill. Thanks for joining us today.
And I'm Chris. Jill and I are your co-hosts and the founders of the Becoming Ellie community.
I know you're wondering why we're called Becoming Ellie. Ellie was the Norse goddess of aging who wrestled Thor and beat him. Chris and I thought, hey, we want to be like Ellie.
You can find out more about us at our website, becomingellie.com. Ellie is spelled E-L-L-I.
Hey, Chris, this episode is a great conversation about healing inflammation and improving our health.
We talked with Karín Feltman about intermittent fasting and a plant-based diet for women over 50, and a lot of things that I think our listeners will enjoy. Let's go to the podcast.
We are so lucky to get to talk with Karín Feltman today. She is a full-time cross-cultural worker in Nepal and doesn't always have access to the internet, so we've been waiting for a chance to talk with her. She graciously made time for us when she was available, technology-wise.
Karín is a registered nurse and the author of Fit, Fierce, and Fabulous Over 50. Her first book is Plant-Based Basics. Her work focuses on holistic health for women over 50 with a particular focus on intermittent fasting and healing through nutrition.
Karín was a hospital nurse for 23 years before beginning work in relief provision and mission trips. She now works on empowerment projects for vulnerable girls and women in Nepal and uses her writing to help fund greater opportunities for the communities she works with.
She completed the Veg Health Nutrition Mastery course with the Veg Health Institute and continues her research on holistic health and healing. Karín is a self-confessed foodie and loves discovering delicious new plant-based recipes, picking up fresh ideas from every new culture she visits.
Welcome, Karín. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here today.
Great to have you. You completely changed your life around. You went from working as a hospital nurse in Kansas for 23 years?
Yep.
To becoming a cross-cultural worker in Nepal. What caused you to make that change?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I was really trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. You know, everybody at some point goes through that. What is the purpose of my life journey?
Yes.
And I was really praying about that and spending a lot of time trying to figure out what that looked like. And during that time, Hurricane Katrina hit in 2005, I guess that was. And I started doing relief and mission work after Hurricane Katrina. I went down to Pass Christian, Mississippi, and I worked in a medical tent 24/7 down there for a couple of weeks. I went back after that and did a teardown mission. I went back again and did a rebuilding mission and realized that at some point, well, from that point on, I started doing relief and mission works. I did the earthquakes in Haiti. I did flood relief in Iowa. I went to Kenya and Malawi and did medical missions there. And I realized at some point that I needed to do this with my life and not just my vacation. So in 2014, I made that transition and I actually went from hospital nursing and, you know, owning a house and a car and everything in Kansas, a normal life. And I sold it all and moved to Nepal. And I've been there ever since. So it'll be 10 years in January coming up.
Oh my gosh.
Wow. That's amazing.
It is. What's it like living in Nepal?
Well, it's not easy. I will say in some ways it's harder on the body and easier on the mind. To me, to live in Nepal, it's kind of a simpler culture. It's still a lot less developed than it is here. So a lot of your day is spent doing physical activity, really hard work. Nothing is easy there. I live in a village in Nepal. I don't have running water. I don't have plumbing. I cooked on fire for the first 2 years. Like a lot of your day is just spent surviving and living.
Like camping.
Yeah, basically, but a little less fun just because it's permanent. But the thing about it is there's less tension and stress than there is in the US. The types of things that you worry about are different there. So I actually find it a relief to be there because the things that consume my day, my body, and my mind are different. And for me, those are better things. I think everybody gets caught up in the rat race here in the US. I did as well. And it's very stressful. And you're always going from one place to another, to another, to another all day long. And that's something that doesn't happen there. So I really appreciate that about living in that culture.
Wow.
And the other thing about it is that relationship is very important in Nepal more than anything else. And so they're very hospitable. They're very warm and welcoming and kind. And I find that in our Western culture anymore, we're so busy and we have so many things to do that often we're rushing through the relationship part in favor of our work and all of our responsibilities. And there, you're usually sitting down with someone on their porch having a cup of tea, or they're feeding you a snack and you're relating. That's what you do. Now, people are late to everything, which drives me crazy, but it's because they favor relationship instead, and they will stop and speak with you and they will spend time with you. And that's what they value.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah. You wouldn't have as busy of a mind all the time, and the stress factors would be less.
Very different. Yeah, just very different. There is stress there, of course. In different ways, the poverty is really high in Nepal. Now, I don't suffer from that the same way they do. So my tension level over that is different than theirs. But that is something that occupies the mind. Health is not good in Nepal. Healthcare is not good. The healthcare system either in Nepal. So that can be stressful, trying to maintain your health and not have access to the things we do here. But yes, I find that I have less tension and less stress in Nepal, at least. Like I said, the things that you're thinking about are more simple, more basic things. What you're going to have for dinner and what you have to do as far as chores and how you're going to get that done. And those are just your basic thoughts, and not everything else that consumes us here. So no one has debt, that kind of thing.
Well, let's talk about your new book.
Okay.
Your new book is Fit, Fierce, and Fabulous Over 50. I love that title.
Thank you.
The secret, I guess the subtitle is The Secret to Lifelong Health, Energy, and Weight Management Through Anti-inflammatory Intermittent Fasting for Women.
Yes.
Wow. What prompted you to write this book?
Yeah, so that's quite a story. I've always been really active. I've always focused on eating well and being healthy. But right around the time that I was getting ready to turn 50, I was probably 49, I started feeling unwell. And I wasn't sure why. Like, my body just sort of started to fail me. I was having a lot of pain. I was having a lot of aches. I was finding it hard to get off the floor when I was sitting down. I just felt awful. I actually told a friend of mine, I feel like I'm dying and I don't know why. And the truth was, my sister did die of an autoimmune disorder at the age of 52. She had scleroderma. And so I was afraid that I was going down that same path and that I likely had something that was similar. So I really did think I was possibly dying. And I also realized I am not going to be able to continue to live the life I'm doing and do the work I'm doing in Nepal if this continues. Like, I couldn't imagine that I would be able to be there even another couple of years. There was a time I was sitting on my couch and I couldn't get up. Like, my body pain and just the mobility was so bad that I couldn't find a way to get off the couch. And eventually I had to lower myself onto the ground and grab onto the coffee table and push myself up. And I remember saying, well, I feel like I'm 80. And then I thought, I know 80-year-olds that don't feel like this. Like, this isn't okay. I'm 49. I'm active.
Not just aging. It's something else.
Exactly. So a couple of things happened at once. I started on a path to get healthier, if I could, and a path to figure out what was wrong with me, because I knew that there was some underlying cause for this. So in this process, I decided to go to Thailand, and because that's fairly close to Nepal and they have a decent healthcare system. So I decided to go to Thailand to get some medical testing to see if I had an autoimmune disorder or something like that. I also joined my 1 millionth diet and exercise program trying to lose this weight. And I was never huge, but it just kind of kept creeping on, and the plateau kept getting higher and higher, and I could never quite get it back down. And so I joined this program that was just dreadful for me. It was called V-Shred. If you do it, that's great. But for me, it was, and you shred your body basically into health. And it's as brutal as it sounds. It's a diet and exercise program. So they have this Facebook group for women, kind of a support group for anyone in the program. And you post pictures in your underwear, in your sports bra, like a before picture. And then periodically during the journey, you post other ones and people say, yay, yeah, I can tell. It looks great. Keep going. Like we support each other and cheer each other on. So I put my picture on this Facebook group and a woman said, I am a physical therapist that specializes in treating women with lipedema. You look to me like you might have that. Have you been evaluated for it? And this is actually June is Lipedema Awareness Month. So if you haven't heard that, I suggest you look it up. It's LIPEDEMA. And so my first thought was, no, I'm just fat, which is what I said, like that's just how we're programmed. No, it's my fault. But I'm a medical person. So I looked it up. And about 15 minutes later, I said, oh, I have this. Like, I know I have this.
Wow.
And it is not found to be an autoimmune disorder, but it is a connective tissue / lymphatic disorder. It causes a disproportionate accumulation of fat and weight in your lower body, usually compared to the top, sometimes upper arms as well. And it has completely unrelated to diet and exercise. You can't lose this by dieting or by exercising. So you get kind of bigger and bigger and bigger. So I was also starting on an anti-inflammatory diet at this time. So I've got these different things going. I'm going to go to Thailand for testing. I am doing this exercise program and I have adopted an anti-inflammatory diet. And that's where I was going to start. In about 2 weeks, I had lost 11 pounds just by switching to this anti-inflammatory diet. I got lower than I had been in 15 years in my weight. I went through this plateau that I couldn't get underneath just by switching to anti-inflammatory foods. So I knew I was onto something. And the size of my legs, though I couldn't get rid of the lipedema tissue, the size of my legs massively decreased from the decrease in inflammation that I didn't even know I had in them. And I have some before and after pictures of that, which are really dramatic. That started that journey. I went to Thailand and got all of the testing and found out, no, I do not have an autoimmune disorder. Yes, it was not confirmed in Thailand. It was confirmed in the US that yes, I had this lipedema. And that's what I was struggling with. That started me on this journey. I was able to lose a massive amount of weight. Now, in full disclosure, I did have lipedema surgery 4 years ago. And that's where they go in and remove the hardened, diseased, scarred tissue that was caused from the lipedema. They removed all of that. I wear compression garments on my arms and my legs every day to help keep that from coming back and to keep the swelling down. But I've been able to maintain those results and my health now in that period of time. I'm 55 now. I am in way better shape and way better health than I have been in at any time in my life. I feel amazing. And so I decided I wanted to write this book for other people that are struggling with turning 50 and getting over 50. Like there are some realities that happen with that. There are things that happen with our metabolism. There's things that happen with our health and our immunity. There are diseases that happen that start usually as we're nearing our 50s and beyond that can be prevented and even reversed with the right type of diet and the right type of lifestyle. And so I did a lot of research on that, and that's where the book came from.
So what is an anti-inflammatory diet or anti-inflammatory intermittent fasting, let's say? Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, there are some foods that cause inflammation in our bodies, and there are foods that fight inflammation in our bodies. Largely, those are plant foods because they have antioxidants in them.
That fight.
Yeah. The foods that fight inflammation are largely plant-based foods because they have antioxidants in them. And those are what fight the free radicals in our bodies. And the free radicals are caused by, it can be environmental toxins. It can be stress and hormones. It can also be food. Meats, dairy, gluten, things like that in many of our bodies have or inflammatory effects. And so the foods that we eat can either help us or harm us in that way. It can either tend towards inflammation or fight inflammation. Now, if you're eating a diet that is high in inflammatory foods, the plant-based foods that you eat or the anti-inflammatory foods that you eat are spending all of their time fighting against those other foods that you ate. If you cut down on the inflammatory foods and you add in more anti-inflammatory foods, then those anti-inflammatory antioxidants can actually heal your body. They're not spending all of their time fighting against what you're doing to it. And they actually start reversing some of the damage and some of the things that are in your body. An anti-inflammatory diet does not have to be all plant-based. The more plants you eat, the more plant strong you eat, the better. But there's also some anti-inflammatory foods such as salmon. There are also a lot of times heavy metals and things in those foods. So we have to be careful that they're clean sourced, but yogurt can have some anti-inflammatory effects as well. So there are some of those other foods.
Even though it's dairy.
Even though it's dairy, they say that because of the probiotics in the yogurt, because of the fermentation in the yogurt, that can help with your gut health. My next book coming out, maybe we'll talk about it later, is actually gut health for women. But because of the fermented part of the yogurt, that actually can help heal your gut, which is huge when it comes to healing inflammation in the body. The intermittent fasting and the anti-inflammatory diet do not have to go together. They can be done one or the other, and there are benefits to both of those, but they are extra beneficial if you do them together. So they really, really work with one another. The intermittent fasting also helps with inflammation because, well, it helps in many ways with your body. So it can help with weight loss just because you're eating less hours of the day. So you're having kind of an automatic calorie restriction unless you're really binging or eating really terrible foods in your eating window, which does happen. Some people do that. So you have usually a calorie reduction, which helps with weight loss, but there's more to it than that. So if you fast for a certain period of time, there's a little bit of controversy, and that's spoken about in the book as to when this time period is. But if you get past, it's definitely probably 16 hours or longer of fasting, you hit what's called autophagy. And autophagy is a process in your body where your body repairs and regenerates and heals itself. It eats your fat cells. It starts eating your damaged cells and it regenerates and remodels those into healthy cells. So in that period where we're fasting, we're actually giving our digestion a rest, which is good for your gut. And you're allowing that autophagy to start. And as that happens, it helps to heal our bodies in ways that we weren't doing before. So when you add that to an anti-inflammatory diet, you're adding all of those healing properties and nutrition into your body. And then that autophagy works really well. And together they're really synergistic and just do a beautiful job in healing.
I'm wondering, do you do both at the same time all the time? Or do you do a week on one, a week on another, and a week doing both?
Right. So it's meant to be a lifestyle. So the most effective diet or health plan is one you'll stick to, right? So it's not all or nothing. Now, the absolutely best way to do this is both of them all the time together. That is the absolute best way to do this. That being said, we're human, right? And there are times where you go out with your friends or you go to a wedding or whatever it is. You go out and celebrate your birthday and you eat what you want that day, so there are times when I don't do this 100%. I strive for doing both of them as often as possible. Now, I do mix up the fasting a little bit. There is some science behind mixing up how you eat and when you eat in order to keep your body guessing a little bit. That keeps your metabolism going. If you do the same thing, same number of calories, same fasting window, same eating window every day, your body can learn those processes and learn that and can adjust basically and kind of start working around your workarounds and can put weight back on you and can kind of figure it out. So there is some science behind maybe doing 18 hours of fasting one day and 16 hours another day, or moving your eating and fasting windows a couple of hours differently periodically. Yeah, there's some science behind that. But ultimately, to eat as clean as you can and to do fasting as many days as you can is the most beneficial. And when I say clean eating, let me just clarify that a little bit. There's two sides to that. So the cleanest way you can eat in my research, and there's a lot of science behind this. There's always going to be controversy when it comes to diets and nutrition, but there's a lot of science backing the fact that a plant-based diet or a plant-strong diet is a very healthy way to eat. You also want that to be whole foods and whole plants. So not extracted juice, not extracted oil, not pieces and parts of your food. You want it to be whole food. No, it can be cooked, it can be ground or blended, like those things are okay, but to eat the whole apple, to eat, lettuce or to eat cucumbers and not to just take out parts of that food. That's the healthiest way to eat. Also, if you can afford to do organic, I know in this day and age, it's difficult to do that for cost. But for the things that you can, if you can do organic, that's best because it doesn't have pesticides and other things that are adding inflammation into your body. There is something called the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15. Those tell you kind of the foods that are best to make sure you get organic in if you can, and the things that aren't as important. It doesn't have to be just plants. If you're going to include meat, if you're going to include dairy, there are better options. There are, grass-fed, pasture-raised beef. There are certain types of meat, certain types of fish, like wild-caught salmon, that is more beneficial than the farm-raised. Trying to keep your food as whole, simple, and clean as you can is beneficial no matter how you eat. Cutting out processed junk is absolutely essential. If you're going to be a junk food junkie, doing this way of eating and living is really not going to help you much. Like the processed foods, high in fats, saturated fat, sugar, salt, and all of those processed things they're not good for your body. They're not good for your health. And no matter what you do, you're actually going to be playing catch up if you eat that way. So just making it simple is the best way to eat.
Wow. I always want to go back to your original story. I think the fact that you posted a photo in a Facebook group and somebody responded in such a way that it basically changed your life, really. I mean, it sent you down the correct path.
It did.
And that's just an amazing story.
Well, and I'll tell you something, though, that was interesting about that, because I did receive it well. But in that same Facebook group, I'm not against body positivity, meaning I believe we have the bodies we're in. We need to love ourselves and appreciate ourselves. And I'm for that. But I think in the process, sometimes we do not encourage people to look into ways that they are unhealthy because we're trying not to bring it up. So when she said to me, "You look to me like you have this disorder. Have you been diagnosed or have you been evaluated for it?" All of these women jumped on and said, "She looks fine. There's nothing wrong with her. I wish I looked like that. She's not sick." And in trying to support me, they were actually dissuading me from considering the fact that I might have something wrong with me. So we need to be careful while we support each other, not to dissuade people from seeking what's going on with them and seeking a healthier way to be. Because like I said, had I listened to that and had they shut her down, that this might not have happened. And now not only do I know I have lipedema, but up to 10 to 11% of Western women have this, and it's almost never diagnosed. Like it's really rarely diagnosed until late stages, until you're so deformed or malformed in your lower half because of these deposits that you can't ignore it anymore. Now, a whole bunch of other women of my friends and Facebook followers actually know they have lipedema because they've heard my story. And it was all from this one woman being brave enough to say, I'm not insulting you, but I've noticed this about you, and I think you have something that needs to be looked into. And I'm very grateful for that.
Good points all around about paying attention. Well, you already knew something was wrong from how you felt. And that's an important thing too, is that we need to trust our feelings.
Listen to your body.
It is, but I was blaming myself. So that's the other thing is that, the whole time it was, I'm just fat. I'm not, all they say, their doctor says, well, you need to eat less and move more. And for some of us, that's not enough. Right. And so the whole time it's like, oh, I must not be, so I have eating disorders from this situation my whole life.
Trying to fix it when that wasn't the fix.
Yeah, trying to get my body to match my effort, and it didn't. And so I kept thinking, I must be doing something wrong. Clearly, I need to, somehow decrease the calories and increase the exercise. And so I have an exercise addiction and eating disorders. And in this book, I do have a whole chapter on disordered eating, on triggers, on being careful to undertake a lifestyle change that involves eating if you have disordered eating and if you have that tendency to really be aware of that and to be aware you can really go down an unhealthy path of healthy eating and healthy lifestyle as well if you're not careful. So it is important to know yourself and to make sure that these are healthy changes for you.
I've heard that too with intermittent fasting, that there are people that have some eating disorders that it can really trigger some health issues for them.
For sure.
It can. So I have a whole chapter on that for people.
I'm glad you addressed that.
Yeah. And even if you don't know if you have an issue with it, it will help you kind of decipher whether or not you're on a slippery slope.
Thank you for that, letting me divert onto that. But I want to go back now to the intermittent fasting. Intermittent fasting can help us lose weight.
Yes.
The autophagy cleans out bad cells and allows your body to create new ones that are hopefully healthier. What other effects maybe does intermittent fasting have for us health-wise?
Yeah, so there's several of them. And I said I have a whole chapter on all of these health conditions and how intermittent fasting can help. A big one is decreasing insulin resistance. And so that cuts down on your risk of diabetes as well. It also cuts down on weight, especially fat, like belly fat in the middle. We know that's unattractive, but that's not the worst part about that. Like that, has real effects on your organs when you carry your fat in those areas on your liver and on your heart and on your lungs and all of that. Yeah, those are a couple of your major ones is your insulin resistance and the specific targeting of the belly fat.
Right, because certainly just trying to lose weight doesn't get rid of belly fat necessarily.
No, and the intermittent fasting also has some real cognitive benefits. Studies have shown that it can even decrease like Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's. It does not cure those things. I mean, certainly if someone is already in those states, it's not going to cure them of that condition, but it could possibly prevent someone into worsening. It could help improve their cognition and their functioning, even if they are currently in the middle of Parkinson's or Alzheimer's disease. It has just really good cognitive and neurological benefits.
I've heard that it helps with brain fog.
It does. And a lot of us just kind of walk around in a brain fog. And in this particular way of eating, I think this has a double whammy of the anti-inflammatory effects and the intermittent fasting. Both of those have really good neurological and cognitive improvement when you do those.
So if we were going to start intermittent fasting, what do we need to get started? And do you have any tools that you recommend?
Yeah. So the great news is you need nothing. You need nothing. So let's start there. That's the great thing. You don't have to go buy something. There's no equipment. There's nothing fancy that you need to do. It's actually cheaper usually because you're eating less during the day. You're usually eating at least one meal less than you were before, and you're not grazing. So you're spending less on food. If you focus on the whole foods and my anti-inflammatory plant-based intermittent fasting, you're eating produce. You're not eating meat, you're not eating dairy, and those are much more expensive overall than that is. So the good news is it's very simple. It's kind of back to basics. You're like eating off the land and you're eating less. You don't need anything. The things that I would suggest in the beginning that you can even use a free one, but I would suggest that someone gets an app for like food tracking in the beginning. This is not about macros.
Do you have a favorite app that you would suggest?
I like Chronometer a lot. That's one of the apps is called Chronometer. I know a lot of people use like MyFitnessPal, and there's a couple of other ones that are popular, and I list them in the book as well. We have a list of about probably 10 of the most popular ones. The reason for that is in intermittent fasting, the goal is not to slash your calories as much as you possibly can, because that will actually shut down your metabolism. That's not a good way. Most of us have yo-yo dieted and done that and used a bunch of weight in the beginning and then you plateau and then it comes back. The goal is actually, if you are looking to lose weight, is to have about a 500 calorie deficit below what you need for maintenance a day. So if your body is normally burning 2,000 calories a day, you might want 1,500, but that's going to be the lowest that you really want to go. You don't want to go below a 500 calorie deficit. So this helps you with the less eating. And if you're changing your eating habits, to just know where you're falling in those calories. So I would suggest tracking them. It is not about macros. This is not a this much protein, this much fat, this much carbs. That's nice because it isn't about that. If you eat enough calories, you will get enough protein. There's a whole section of the book. How do you get your protein on a plant-based diet is a huge question. And that's not an issue if you're eating a well-rounded plant-based diet. But this is about knowing, and I kind of eat similar things during the day. Like one of my meals will be, say, oatmeal with some nuts and seeds on it and a banana and some almond milk. And so now I know about how many calories that is a day. So you kind of get used to it once you've tracked for about a month or so to what your different meals are. And then you can make sure that you're getting the right amount of calories in your diet. That would be the first tool. I would also say maybe a food log, which these also act as a food log. If you are using them as a calorie tracker, you're entering the food and the amounts that you eat. I would also say a food scale is good because most of us have really no idea what a serving is, especially in this day and age. Everything has been supersized and an actual serving is almost never what we're eating. So just to have a good idea, what really is 6 ounces of this, or, what is this many grams of a potato?
I'm always shocked when I start to weigh my food and I think I'm eating 28 grams, the perfect amount of the single serving.
112. Yeah.
Like, oh my gosh. How did that grow over time?
Yeah, so just knowing those are the biggest tools. And then there are fasting apps, which just tell you, like, you enter in my book are 10 different types of intermittent fasting. So there are many different styles and types, and there's something for everybody, and not all of them are for everyone. So you can read through those and see which one is best for you before you start. And then once you've decided on one, which I would say start kind of easy. Like my favorite would be to say start with a 16-8, which means you are fasting for 16 hours and you're eating for 8 hours. That's what is a really easy one to start. It kind of cuts out breakfast. You can eat lunch and dinner still, and then you'll just fast from when you're finished with dinner until the next day, 16 hours later. So there are fasting apps where you enter in your times, like I want to do an 18-6 and then I'm starting eating now, and it will tell you when you need to start fasting. It'll tell you when it's time to start eating again, how many hours left you have of fasting. It keeps track. So there are many different ones. There's one called Fastic. There's one called Life. It's the Life app. There are multiple intermittent fasting apps. Most of them have free apps. A lot of them also have upgrades where you can read articles or you can do different activities in there, or maybe exercise. And so you can customize them to you if you want to do a paid version. The free version is usually pretty simple. There are tons of Facebook groups. So I would also say getting into a Facebook support group to answer your questions is another good way to do that.
You mentioned a question I was going to ask you, which is, are there different types of intermittent fasting, and how do we know which one is best for us? And our audience is pretty much women 50 and older. And does that have any bearing on what we decide to do?
Well, I mean, it does. And like I said, that's why my book is specifically for women over 50. Not that, so men can also benefit from this book. Women under 50 can benefit from this book, preparing to be 50 someday. It is not necessary that you are over 50 to read it, but I did keep that in mind. There are many different types of intermittent fasting. Some of them are like alternate day fasting, where you eat regularly one day and the next day you fast, or you only eat maybe 500 calories that day. And then the next day after that's normal. And so it's an alternate day fasting. There are timed fastings, like I was mentioning, the 16-8 or the 18-6. I usually try to do 24. So 19-5 or 24, meaning like I'll start eating at 1:30. I start lunch. So I want lunch and dinner, but I'll eat at 1:30, and then I will stop eating by like 5:30 or 6. So I'll eat lunch, I'll eat an early dinner, and then I'm done. And then I'll start again the next day. So that gives me 4 to 5 hours of eating and the rest of the time fasting. I find that really good because I can't cram in too many calories in 4 hours. I can cram in way too many calories if you get me to 18 or 16. There is 1 meal a day fasting where you eat as much as you want, but basically in a 1 hour window. I don't find that that's as helpful, just because I would tend to binge and overeat in that hour period of time. And then I would be starving the rest of the time. But some people that works really well for. There's lots of different types, but there's a warrior fast. That one doesn't have a lot of science behind it. And I talk about that in the book too, but that's something that some people do. There are a 5 and 2, which is 5 days on and 2 days off of fasting. And all of these things have certain benefits and all of them have certain downfalls. The one thing is that it can have some hormonal balance issues on some of different types of fasting, and they go into them in the book. It's not as much of an issue for those of us that actually don't have so many hormones anymore, like past menopause. But so if someone is in childbearing years or if they're pregnant, like they need to be very careful with that because some of this can cause your hormones to be less regulated or regulated in a different way than you're used to. But that we go through that in the book as well.
Well, let's switch it up a little bit to your first book. Your first book was called Plant-Based Basics, an easy to follow step-by-step guide to transitioning to a plant-strong diet and lifestyle.
Yeah.
Tell me, what exactly is a plant-based diet? I picture salad every meal. Not really, but if you could talk about that.
And just for disclosure, it's a very small book. I consider it more of a pocket guide. It's 36 pages. It's just a nice, small kind of accompaniment. It would be a good one to go along with the Plant-Based Basics book. And it is, again, like you said, about how to just transition into eating more plants in your diet. So yes, salads certainly could count. Okay. Because that's what we all think about when we think of plants. People say, like, what do you eat? Grass and sticks and leaves and, which that's fair. But
indoor or outdoor plants? No.
There are a lot of things that are considered plants, right? So rice, brown rice, quinoa, lentils, beans, all of your vegetables, all of your fruits, nuts and seeds, like all of those things are plants. Yes, you've got salads. The next favorite thing I have would be like a Buddha bowl, they call it, where you have a base. So you could have even say a taco Buddha bowl. So you have brown rice and you have black beans and you have salsa, like fresh salsa, which is tomatoes and peppers and onions. You have fresh onions. You can put black olives in it. You can put anything you want in there. Just think about a burrito in a bowl. So you've got a burrito bowl. You can have a burrito if you want. Just don't pick a tortilla that now I do the gluten-free one. So I would do corn because I'm trying to do less of the inflammatory foods. So I cut out gluten. You can have taco night, but instead of having ground beef, you can have beans or you can make taco meat. There's a lovely recipe and I have 50 recipes, by the way, in my Fit, Fierce and Fabulous Over 50 book. There are 50 plant-based recipes to help get you started. And they're simple. They're not fancy things that you need to buy. Like that's the thing about plant-based eating. It can be very delicious. It can be super complicated if you want it to, but it can also be very easy. You can make a taco meat with chopped up walnuts, mushrooms, and cauliflower and taco seasoning. And you actually basically saute that and fry it and cook it together. And it's a crumble. It just looks just like taco meat, tastes like taco meat. You can make taco night. You can have spaghetti. Spaghetti, I like to get maybe a lentil pasta or a chickpea pasta instead of your regular pasta. You have your marinara sauce, your tomato sauce. To make that higher in protein, you can blend white beans into it. It makes a creamy, lovely sauce. Hummus is something that is highly plant-based. That's just ground chickpeas and tahini, which is a sesame paste. And you can add garlic and different things like that. So I love hummus and veggie trays. Things like that. There's plant-based mac and cheese. You can make a lovely queso cheese sauce out of ground cashews and nutritional yeast and a few other just little spices. And you can make queso, which is really actually a pretty convincing dip. I make plant-based pizza all the time. I'll make either a cauliflower crust or just a vegan crust with some different kinds of like almond flour or things like that. And I make my own sauce and put all the veggies you want on top and make a plant-based cheese or not. And it's delicious.
All of my cauliflower crusts end up being too loose and floppy, and I don't know exactly what I'm doing wrong.
It's not my favorite, to be honest. If I'm going to make a crust, I usually just make a gluten-free vegan crust.
Okay.
It has like rice flour, like different kinds of flour in it.
I see.
The cauliflower crusts that hold up best have cheese in them. And so, and
that's kind of dairy.
So they're not plant-based. And so you just have to look.
Yeah.
That's the other thing I want to really stress for people is just if you're going to buy something in a package. So you're best off buying something that's not in a package and you're going to be going well, like buying your beans, buying your vegetables, buying your fruit, your nuts, those things are fine. If you're buying something that is pre-made, say like your pasta or your crusts, turn it around and read your label. And are there things in it either that are not plant-based or that aren't even food? I mean, a lot of the stuff we have is chemicals.
A lot of chemicals, right?
A lot of chemicals, a lot of saturated fat, a lot of sodium, a lot of things like that. So just read your labels. Now some of the chickpea pasta or lentil pasta literally that's all it has. It's just ground up chickpea flour, ground up lentil flour. That's fine. It's just important to make sure you know what's going into your body. If you're trying to heal it and trying to be ultimately healthy, you just need to know what you're fueling it with. And a lot of the processed foods are just fueled with junk. So unfortunately, that's just the truth of it.
Yeah.
And I would say that just cut down. It's allowable to have a whole grain pasta or a lentil pasta, but I wouldn't focus on that to be the majority of your food. Try to get the majority of your food to be the actual whole plants. That's going to be your healthiest. But, you can just add, say you don't want to be completely plant-based, but you want to add more plants into your diet, because the more plants you're putting in your mouth, the less bites of other things that you're putting in your mouth probably. So, you're filling up on the healthy things and there's less room for the unhealthy things. So say I still want to make a lasagna. Okay. So you get your lasagna, but then add a lot of add vegetables to it, add with your sauce, put a layer of spinach or put some zucchini in there, or even just grind up in your sauce some carrots and some zucchini and some beans, things like that. I make my ricotta out of tofu and it's fantastic. You blend tofu with some Italian herbs and garlic and lemon juice and a little bit of salt, and it's creamy and fabulous, just like ricotta cheese.
Wow. Is there do you have a recipe for that?
I do. It's in my book.
Okay.
Awesome.
I was just, because I was making eggplant lasagna and I was using cottage cheese, and I was thinking, well, by the time I put the cheese in there and the cottage cheese in there, my eggplant lasagna was actually pretty,
that's it.
Not plant-based anymore.
Well,
right?
It was like, I'm not sure that I'm saving a whole lot. I guess, I don't know. It just seemed like it wasn't the healthiest dish I could have made.
So it's on page 256 in the book. It's called Ricotta Filling, and it has a block of extra firm tofu, a tablespoon of nutritional yeast, which is optional, but that adds a lot of nutrition, but you don't have to have it. 3 cloves of garlic, a 1/4 cup of fresh parsley, 1 teaspoon Italian seasoning or mixed herbs, a tablespoon of lemon juice, and salt to taste.
Wow.
That's it.
Yeah, that would taste great.
And if you want to add some vegan Parmesan in, you can. That's another option. And then you just grind it up in your blender or food processor or whatever. You could even mash it by hand if you don't have those things. And then it turns into just this creamy loveliness. If you want it a little thinner, you can add a little bit of plant milk or a little bit of water, and then it just spreads beautifully. And when you heat it up, it feels and tastes just like ricotta.
That's cool. Thank you.
The fake meat, the people that are eating like these
The Impossible Burgers. And
Beyond Burger.
Yeah, but what's your take on that?
Yeah. So let me commend those companies for coming up with something that is an alternative that is good enough and tasty enough that it actually entices some meat eaters to occasionally not eat meat. I think that's a beautiful thing. Every time we're not eating meat it's a benefit to our planet. It's a benefit to our bodies. It's a benefit to lots of different things. So I don't think they're a bad thing. I think that there are lots of meat eaters that are eating those now on occasion. And I think we are decreasing our meat consumption in the world. I think that's great. Because especially beef, it leads to really bad greenhouse gas emissions and water shortages and cutting down our rainforests on the planet. So if we can cut down on meat consumption, it's actually really beneficial for our planet, even if you don't care about the animal side of it. So I think they have benefit. For health, there's actually not a whole lot of benefit to those, I think, versus eating real meat. They have kind of similar saturated fat levels. They have similar things as far as meat is. They're highly processed. They're not made out of anything that's a whole food. I would not call them healthy in any way. Now, if I was craving a burger, I would opt for one of those over a regular meat burger. But I still think if we're eating those on a regular basis, it's not going to contribute much to health.
Okay.
It's still got a lot of saturated fat, which is really bad for cardiovascular disease and, helps clog our arteries and increase our cholesterol. I don't think they have cholesterol in them. Animal products are the only foods that have cholesterol in them. So by cutting out meat, you're cutting out your intake of cholesterol, but our bodies do still make cholesterol as well. So that's not to say that you can't have a cholesterol issue, but yeah. So they're also high in calories. So if you're focusing, that's the other benefit of transitioning to a plant-based diet is you can eat a lot more food for a lot less calories. If you're eating meat and dairy in a very short period of time, you've reached your calorie max. You can eat, 10 times that volume of grains and beans and broccoli and still have less caloric intake. But when you're switching to some of these alternate foods, you are now eating a similar caloric intake as you would to be eating meat and dairy. So you just have to really look at that if you're looking for weight loss. The other thing I was going to say, nuts and seeds are super healthy, super good for you, but also very calorie dense. So if your goal is to lose weight, definitely look at the amounts you're eating. Like an ounce of nuts is not very much. It's not a cup of nuts. A cup of nuts has got like a couple thousand calories in it. So just watch your portions on those things.
That's another thing when you weigh your walnuts or whatever. It's like, I get not a whole lot.
But some things like, pumpkin seeds and things like that, some of those things are so healthy and they really, even walnuts, they do suggest in getting some of those in your diet every day. Just make sure you're not grazing on those and that's not your go-to snack because that will affect your weight if you have a problem with it. If you don't, and you're looking for a weight increase, that's a good way to do it on a plant-based diet is to add lots of those things.
So if you're on a plant-based diet, do you feel differently?
Well, I feel amazing. And I will say that most of the people that I know that do this diet feel really good. I think one of the biggest things is the energy. You're like, if I stuff myself with food, with plant-based food, which occasionally happens, so I celebrate with food like everybody else. But if I'm doing it with plant-based foods, I don't feel like I immediately want to go to bed. You know how, think about Thanksgiving and you stuff yourself with turkey and gravy and all of that, your butter, potatoes, and you're just like, and you're sluggish and you can hardly stay awake and you want to lay down and put your hand in your pants, and just watch football. I don't feel like that when I stuff myself with plants. When I stuff myself with plants, my stomach is full, but my body doesn't change. It does not clog my system. I feel like the energy that I'm using and the energy that I'm burning is clean energy. It's kind of like I think about a car and it's just like really pure, clean fuel. So I don't need coffee. I don't need caffeine. I don't need sugar, like all of those things. My body is naturally energetic all day long now. And that was not the case before. I nap less. All of those things that I needed before to keep me going, I don't now. And I'm older now than I ever was before.
All right. That's interesting.
I will say I had not currently a boyfriend, but still a friend, but was a boyfriend at the time who decided to do a 30-day plant-based trial when we were together. He had first said, I could never eat that way. All he ate was meat, starch, and cheese. He would have meat and maybe potato or rice slathered in cheese every day. And he kept saying, I could never eat the way you did. But then he would eat my food and say, this is fantastic. Your black bean enchiladas are great. And then he's like, I could never eat this way. And then he's like, this is terrific. So finally, he realized A, it could taste good. And B, he said, I'm going to try this as a 30-day challenge. I'm not going to do this forever, but I see if I can do it for 30 days. That was 2 years ago in August, and he is still eating a plant-based diet today because of how differently he felt from switching that way and how much he started enjoying the taste of the other food once he knocked out all of the sugar and the salt and the processed foods. The other foods, your taste buds do change and they started tasting really, really good to him. And so now he really enjoys, he just made a big thing of veg plant-based chili the other day and some cornbread and, the food's good. And so he's still eating that way. And when I met him, he said, I'm where I like to be. I'm at 202 pounds. Well, he had kind of a dad bod and, that kind of gut that stuck out. And he's like 8 years younger than me and he looked 5 years older. And now today he's at 185 pounds and he did nothing different. All he did was switch to a plant-based diet and immediately the weight came off.
Wow.
If we're following an intermittent fasting plan, do we still need to take a look at the plant-based diet? And what happens if we combine both?
Right. So they are definitely synergistic. So I have done just plant-based eating. I have done just intermittent fasting, and I've done them together. And I can tell you that is always better when I do them together. Like I said, there's benefits to doing both, but I still find if I'm intermittent fasting, but I'm not doing plant-based and I'm eating more things with dairy or more things with, well, gluten are plants, but I'm doing more of the inflammatory foods and meat, the inflammation still creeps back up. My weight creeps up a little bit, which I believe is the water retention and the inflammation. I'm more sluggish. I don't feel as good. My digestion is not as good. I have struggled my whole life until now with like constipation, which my doctors always said, well, that's just your system. It's just the way it is. And as soon as I switched to a plant-based diet, that was completely fixed. But if I add back in meat or dairy, even for a couple of days, it will slow my system down again. So I find that just the intermittent fasting without the plant-based is still not ideal for my system. There's been other times where I've done the plant-based, but not the intermittent fasting, and say I'll go on a vacation or something. And the times that I eat, I can't really control and I'm eating kind of all day long. And again, I still get the inflammation. I'm also usually eating more calories because I'm still eating plants, but I'm eating 3 times a day and I'm eating snacks and maybe I've put alcohol back in there or something. And again, it will creep back up. So until and unless I do them together, I'm not as healthy. When I do them together, I feel optimal. Let's put it that way. So either of them are beneficial. It's not all or nothing. That's what I like. It's meant to be a lifestyle. This is not a diet. And so it's not like, oh, I went out yesterday and I blew it, so now I'm not going to do it anymore. Like, just get back on. It's about life. And it's cumulative, right? The effects are cumulative. So it's about having more good foods than bad. It's about having more good days than bad. It's about doing more of the fasting than not. And like, that's going to benefit us. So it's important not to just think I'm either failing or I'm winning. Every healthy choice you make and every healthy food you put in your mouth and every day that you do your fasting well is going to benefit you. So just keep on with it.
I think you pretty much have talked about dealing with chronic health conditions, but I know many of our listeners deal with that, with chronic health conditions. Is there anything about changing or timing our food or changing our food that helps particularly with those kinds of things?
Well, so the anti-inflammatory, obviously eating. Also, the one thing I didn't bring up was like joint pain and arthritis and body pain. So that is largely driven by inflammation. And so all of those things can be decreased if they're doing the anti-inflammatory eating, as well as the intermittent fasting. The autophagy will help with that as well. I would say timing, you're better off eating earlier in the day than later. Now, like lunch and dinner is fine, but it is better not to go to bed on a full stomach. So like, even if you're going to do that one meal a day eating, it's best not to do that at 9 p.m. and then go to bed, because when we sleep, our body also helps clean out its system and do all of that repair. But if you eat right before you go to bed, again, that time is going to be spent digesting your food instead of healing your body. So if you can give your stomach, it's best to stop maybe 4 hours or so before bed, at least if possible, eating, so that when you go to bed, your system is clear and then your body can just heal itself and not spend its time digesting. So timing wise, I would say that's probably important. And in a lot of the studies, they show that people have the best outcomes if they eat in the first half of the day more than they eat in the second half. So I would start making like lunch or that first meal, your bigger meal, and then having a bit of a smaller meal as your second one instead of the way we're used to, which is usually flipped. So.
Right.
Well, we're told that getting enough protein for women over 50 is especially important to keep our muscle mass. And I have a couple questions about that. Like, you talk about no meat, or what do you differentiate between red meat and, like, say, chicken? Not really.
Not really. And I'll tell you one of the reasons. So another huge, actually, I'm glad you brought that up because I missed this in the chronic health thing. And that is the benefit for cancer. Intermittent fasting is hugely beneficial in not only the prevention of cancer, but also in the treatment of cancer. And they do fasting during chemo in a lot of like USC. Walter Longo is a scientist at University of Southern California, and he's a longevitist and also a cancer specialist. He has discovered that basically you can really increase the effects of the chemo by decreasing people's calorie intake and food and fasting during that treatment. And when they feed those patients, and they, a lot of times we want to feed people who are sick, that actually is
with
not
comfort food.
Yeah. And just to fatten them up, I think, but that's actually not beneficial. And especially in cancer treatment, they have much worse outcomes when they eat extra calories during cancer treatment versus when they do the fasting. The other thing is that animal protein feeds cancer. So in studies, they can turn cancer on and off. So they take already cancer cells. I think they did this in mice that with cancer. And if you feed it, I believe it's 30% of your calories is animal protein. They used milk protein as well as meat protein. It turns on the cancer growth and those cancer cells proliferate. When they shut it off and when they remove the animal proteins, I think they brought it down to 5% or less. It shuts the cancer growth off, and they can consistently turn it on and turn it off and turn it on and turn it off by giving or taking away animal protein. So that does not matter whether it is chicken. It does not matter whether it is fish. It does not matter whether it is dairy.
And there are studies for this?
Yeah. And so look at Forks Over Knives is a really brilliant documentary. It's kind of older. It's a little bit dry now compared to what we're used to watching, but it's great. So the China study is Dr. T. Colin Campbell. That's who did the China study. And that's who discovered this. And he had just, I don't know how many years, over 30 years of study that studied this and consistently every time found this. He used to be a dairy farmer, and his family for generations and generations and generations were dairy farmers. His project was to figure out how to increase protein intake using animal protein in developing countries. Like that was his whole goal, was to figure out how to bring more animal proteins to these countries. And then he discovered that it actually was terrible for cancer. So he has become fully plant-based and has changed his entire outlook based on that. So he was kind of the least likely person to change. His whole focus was animal protein, and he has completely changed based on all of his research. So
what strategies do you suggest we use to get enough protein? Because I always struggle trying to get enough protein by eating only the plant-based foods and by restricting when we eat.
Yes. And that is a challenge. So the thing with intermittent fasting, you need to be intentional about your food, right? You do need to make sure you have protein. You need to make sure you have all different kinds of nutrients, because when you're eating all day long, you get more variety of your foods, right? And so if you're eating only a couple times, you need to intentionally make sure that you add some things. I mean, the good news is if you're eating lots of plants, you're getting lots of nutrients. So you're going to be getting more of what you need if you're not eating any of the processed stuff in the process. Getting protein, there's a couple of things. First of all, overall, we think we need more protein than we do. Now, yes, women over 50 need more than we do probably as under, and more like it's more 70 to 75. At 50 is not quite as much of an increase that we need. But as we get older, to not be frail, we need to add more protein.
Yeah, we don't want to lose muscle mass.
We don't. But we as Americans especially think we need way more protein than we do. And that's been because of some of these keto diets and some of these other diet strategies that have come about. We now think we need a lot. We actually need like 0.5 to 0.8, maximum of 1 gram of protein per kilogram of body weight. I weigh 75 kilograms, so I need a max of 75 grams of protein a day. Now, the older we get, we might be higher up, like it might be the 1 instead of the 0.8, but a lot of us are getting a lot more than that. So as long as we're hitting, when you're over 50, say you're 1 gram of protein per kilogram of body weight, and your kilogram, just, you can look it up, but is your pounds divided by 2.2.
I was just going to say, I'm going to have to do my little calculation.
It's 2.2. So, yeah, it's 2.2.
Where's my calculator?
So realize we don't need a massive amount of protein, and it's actually easier to get than we think. The foods, all plant foods have protein. 100% of plant foods have protein in them. We can get them from all of your foods. Now, if you eat an adequate amount of calories, you will get an adequate amount of protein. The key is some of these foods you have to eat a whole lot of to get an adequate amount of calories. Like say broccoli, you probably have to eat 10 cups of broccoli, more than that to get your calories. You don't want to get all of your protein, or you're not going to get it all from like your leafy greens or things like that. You need, if you can, to add things like beans. Lentils are really high in protein. Quinoa, really high in protein and really healthy. Tofu, soy is really high in protein and also not cancer causing. That has been dispelled. So for those of us that grew up in the era where they believed that was a cancer risk or breast cancer increase, that is no longer, the science no longer shows that. So soy is a great way to get it. Nutritional yeast. So that's where I said you don't have to have that. It adds kind of a cheesy flavor to food, but it has a lot of protein. I'd have to look it up for sure, but I think it's like 8 or 12 grams of protein for 2 tablespoons of nutritional yeast. You're already a seventh of your way there or whatever, just by eating that. Those things, if you add those things to your meals, that will help. I was talking about blending white beans into your pasta sauce.
Yeah.
Way to add protein into your food without adding meat and without adding dairy. A lot of plant milks have protein in them. Now, I will say some of us will need to do like a protein powder, like a protein drink in a smoothie or something. There's nothing.
Do you have
wrong.
A favorite that you use?
I don't, because I don't live in the US, so I don't have a lot.
Oh, right. Of course.
There's only one there that's available. I would just say a plant-based one, so there are those, a vegan, like plant-based one that does not have anything else in it. I believe that it's best for us to get our nutrition from food, if possible, because food is designed perfectly. Right? The protein comes with the fiber, that comes with the carbs, that comes with this, and all of that is made to get into our body and assimilate in a certain way just perfectly. Isolated things don't do as well with that. But that said, if you have to supplement, then I would. And I want to bring up supplementation really quickly. So protein powder, like a protein drink, is a way to do that. You can get 20 grams of protein per scoop, calories for a lot of these. And so I just mix that with some plant milk, throw a banana in, and there's my breakfast. But supplementing with a plant-based diet, there's a couple things that need to be supplemented. And in reality, a lot of them have to be supplemented, even if you're not plant-based. Most people are deficient in them, even if they're meat eaters. But B12 is one of them. Vitamin B12 is available in some plant foods, but is way more available in animal foods. And so that is something that usually needs to be supplemented. Again, most meat eaters are also deficient in vitamin B12. So it is actually good. They have like spray under the tongue or a vitamin or that kind of thing, but that's something that needs to be. Vitamin D, for those of us that are not out most of us aren't. If you live on the equator and you're outside for 30 minutes every day in the direct sun, you might get enough vitamin D. We are not going to get it, and our bodies don't make it just normally. But a lot of dairy products are fortified with vitamin D. But if you're not doing dairy products, then you're not necessarily getting the fortification. They also fortify breakfast cereals, but that's a processed food. So if you're not eating those things, bread, like that are normally fortified, you need to think about it. A lot of the plant-based milks are fortified with vitamin D, but also that's something that maybe a supplement is something that can be included in your daily. And then iodine.
Oh, iodine.
And people don't eat fish too. I mean, the iodine is something you can do that though with like some nori seaweed or some kelp flakes or some dulse. Like you can eat that in your foods if you're using seaweed and things like that. But often people need to supplement. Iodine, you need to be very careful with. It's easy to get too much of it as well. Like as far as like drops and things like that are not ideal. It's best to try to get through food. I would suggest just getting some baseline blood testing for these things just to see if you're deficient in anything or if you're not, and supplementing the ones that you are. And I would say every, 6 months to a year to get another follow-up test and just make sure you're still doing well on all of those things is beneficial.
The iodine is one of those things that I tend to forget about, but
I do too, but I do eat a lot of sushi and like veg sushi and things and seaweed. So and when I've gotten it tested, it's fine. Usually, like I said, it's a thyroid thing and that will affect your thyroid function if you don't have enough. So if you get your thyroid tested and your TSH and your T3 and your T4, all of that, then that will tell you if your thyroid is functioning optimally or not. Yeah, those are your big ones. And usually most of those you can just do a plant-based, a vegan supplement, vitamin supplement, and usually that will cover most of those things.
Okay. Is there any food you use as like, I don't know, a medicine or whatever, like if you have a headache or a sinus infection or?
Well, so interesting. I live in the village in Nepal and I like to try to eat off the land, although sometimes that doesn't go so well. I won't tell you those stories, but that's where you almost kill yourself eating the wrong thing. But you know what? Roses actually are really good for colds and for sore throats and for those kinds of things. And you can eat them. Roses are edible, which I did not really realize. Like you can eat them on a salad. You can dry the leaves and make a tea out of them. And also bougainvillea, the flowers of the bougainvillea are also good for coughs, colds, and sore throats. So I try to use those things if I have some kind of a respiratory illness. To be honest, I don't get sick very much now that I eat a plant-based diet. So, the food that I'm eating is my medicine.
Yeah.
So I don't really have to do specifically too much. Now, ginger is really good for digestion. So, slicing up ginger and making a ginger tea or eating some ginger is good for digestion if you have some stomach upset. Yeah, I would use that sometime. Mint also is really good for digestion and for settling the stomach.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So do you have a favorite recipe that you would share with our listeners, something that you like to make that's quick and easy and, great for our bodies?
I do. And again, it's in my book, but I can give you even a simpler version. I would say my favorite is a lentil shepherd's pie. I absolutely love lentil shepherd's pie. It is a comfort food. It's delicious. It's easy to make. So you just make mashed potatoes, but make those with plant milk and not your butter and your, milk and all that. So just make mashed potatoes. Usually that's all I do is a little bit of salt and pepper, maybe some garlic powder and some plant milk and just smash up my potatoes. And then you can even do, I like dried beans and lentils and things, but canned is okay. Like that's fine if that's what you have. Let's just say canned. Take a can of lentils, like a big, I think they're 15 ounces or something, can of lentils. And I would rinse and drain them. And then I like to saute just a little bit of carrots and onion. You can put whatever else in you want, a little bit of celery or bell peppers or whatever, and just in a pan, throw in a can of diced tomatoes and your lentils and just stir those up and cook it until it gets a little bit kind of thick and bubbly. And then just put that in a pan and put your mashed potatoes on top and bake it. That's it.
That's awesome.
I like to eat it deconstructed sometimes too. I live in Nepal. I don't even have an oven. So I make the mashed potatoes, I make the lentils, and then I just pour the lentils over the top of the mashed potatoes like gravy. So that's my deconstructed lentils pie.
Yeah.
It's an upside down shepherd's pie.
It is.
And that is quick and easy, isn't it? That's great.
Easy and it's delicious. And the lentils are unbelievably good for you. Like there's so many good things in lentils and there's a zillion different types of lentils. And so there's for that one, I would usually get like a brown lentil or a green lentil, something that's a little bit bigger and chunky or not the red ones and the yellow ones kind of fall apart and they're too thin for this, but that's it. And
thank you. I love that.
All right. You live in Nepal, but you have been all around the world, it sounds like. Is any cuisine your favorite?
And it's not from traveling. It's just from being in the US is Mexican. Mexican food is brilliant. I love it. It's easy here and it's really easy on a plant-based diet. So making like veg fajitas, all you have to do is saute up your vegetables with some spices and put them in a tortilla. I make black bean enchiladas. So same, you just layer your tortillas and your black beans and I make that cashew queso, which is in my book too, and enchilada sauce and bake it, black bean tacos, cauliflower tacos. It's just so easy to make and a burrito bowl. So that translates over really well. The Mexicans eat lots and lots of vegetables and beans and things like that. So really that translates well. And now I live in Nepal, so I do like Nepali food. We make dal bhat, which is rice. So I do brown rice because of the fiber and stuff in that. It's a better choice. But rice, and then they make like a lentil soup that they pour over the top, and then some curried vegetables that you eat alongside it, or maybe some spinach too. And so I like that because that's my part of the world now. And they eat twice a day, every day.
Wow.
I don't. I actually make chili and soups and stews and things like that a lot too, but it's delicious. Another one you were talking about eggplant is making kind of an eggplant parmesan is really easy and plant-based. And you can just cook the eggplant, and you can do a breading if you want, but I usually do like some rice flour, just kind of dip it in a little bit of plant milk and just dredge in a little bit of rice flour. And I use a nonstick skillet. I don't cook with oil and I just cook it until it gets a little crispy. And then you just pour on some spaghetti sauce, like just a can of spaghetti sauce or a jar of spaghetti sauce. And then I make usually a little bit of the ricotta or one of the cheeses and then bake it. And that's it.
Oh, wow. That sounds a lot healthier than what I did.
He said once you start trying to get all the other stuff in it. Yeah. So
If people want to follow you online, where should they go? Where do they look?
excellent questions. So I do have, I have an author page on both Facebook and Instagram. So I'm Karín Feltman author, I think, on both of those. I also, and I'll provide you guys with some links if you want to put those for your readers.
Yeah, we'll put those in the show notes.
Great. And then I also have 2 Facebook groups. So one is a Fit, Fierce, and Fabulous Women Over 50 group, which is just a women's specific group. It isn't necessarily diet or exercise related. It's just how to be fit, fierce, and fabulous over 50. And then I have a Fit, Fierce, and Fabulous Intermittent Fasting for Women group as well. And that one is not 50 specific. That's just for women and intermittent fasting. And so that's for people to, post their struggles or questions or wins or anything. So those would be the best ways to connect with.
Yeah, we'll make sure that's in the show notes.
Did you say you had an Instagram page too?
Yeah, that one is also Karín Feltman author.
Okay. Remind us of your book titles and where can our listeners find your books?
Yes. So the first one that I wrote was just that small pocket guide, and it's called Plant-Based Basics, an easy to follow step-by-step guide to transitioning to a plant-strong diet and lifestyle. And Karín Feltman RN, I am a nurse. And so that's where that comes from. So that is on Amazon. And it's also on like Goodreads. You can get it. And there's a couple of other places for the people that are not in the US or don't have Amazon. Ingram Spark and Goodreads are both places that you can get the book as well. And then I have the Fit, Fierce, and Fabulous Over 50, The Secret to Lifelong Health, Energy, and Weight Management Through Anti-Inflammatory Intermittent Fasting for Women. And that has a little bit of my story in it, a little bit of my health journey in it, and then a whole lot of science-based info on both the intermittent fasting and the anti-inflammatory diet, 10 types and 50 recipes. So that's also on Amazon.
That's great.
Karín Feltman RN is the author name on that one as well. Yeah. And then I don't know if I think you were going to ask me this, but they can also connect with me. Anyone who's in Ohio in August, I actually went to high school in Bay Village, Ohio. So I am from the Cleveland area, at least during my high school years. And I'm going to be at the Leetonia Public Library on August 14th. And then I will be at the Wadsworth Public Library on August 15th from 7 to 9 p.m. And I will be doing author talk, a little bit of a reading out of here, probably book signing, book sales, that kind of thing. So I will be selling them in person, signed copies of my books at both of those events. So I'm really looking forward to that.
That's great.
Exciting.
Well, we'll make sure to link to that as well. Really appreciate you being with us today, and really think that you've been a wonderful guest for us. And I really appreciate all of your sharing. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks. So yeah, it's easy for me to give probably too much information, but
no, that's great.
No, it was wonderful.
To you. Yeah. Okay. We'll talk again soon. Okay.
Safe travels back to Nepal.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. Karín really has a compelling story about improving her health with both intermittent fasting and a plant-based diet.
Yes. In fact, she makes me want to start to take up our veggie challenge again. I really enjoy eating a lot of veggies.
Yes, I had the same thought. I did like, though, that she allowed room to still eat meat and animal products for people, that she wasn't emphatic that you must give up all meat. I also noticed that a lot of people we've talked with say dairy is inflammatory.
Well, it's inflammatory to some people, I think. It's just like everything. It depends on your body,
Yeah, I guess, yes.
Some people don't seem to have a problem with it. Other folks do. I don't know. But it definitely, a plant-based diet is a very healthy diet.
Yes. Though I find the whole question about protein to be
challenging.
We've talked to a lot of people who say protein is really important as we age. And she did say you do need more as you age, but maybe we don't need as much as people in the US think.
I don't know. It depends if you're trying to build muscle mass, how much you work out, how much muscle you have to start with, I think. I guess
that's true. Yeah.
There's a lot of pieces and parts to it. You do have to eat an awful lot of some vegetables to get the protein amounts that, like, I think, 20 grams of protein per meal. And if you do intermittent fasting, you only do 2 meals. So maybe it's 30 a meal. And maybe I have the wrong numbers, but everybody's different.
Right. It's interesting.
Yeah. And challenging.
It is challenging.
The more you learn, the more there is to it, right? It's not a simple thing.
I think she's right in that if you are eating a healthy, well-balanced diet, whether you're eating all plants, a plant-based diet exclusively or whatever, the more well-rounded it is,
right,
the healthier you're going to be.
Yeah. And balanced means different things to different people,
Well, I mean, like not just eating all the same.
Right. Not eating the same vegetables every day. Yeah. And that's, I think, what you're thinking.
If you're going to, let's say you're going to do plant-based diet, you still have to eat grains then, or beans and legumes.
Seeds
and
nuts.
It's not just eating salads and roasted vegetables.
Yeah, because when you think of when I think of plant-based diet, just a quick thought in my mind, I'm picturing lettuce, but that's like one of the 150 different, and probably more than that, different things you should be eating.
So I've tried intermittent fasting, and I think it actually has worked for me. The problem is in trying to get everything in that. Like if I'm working out, when I'm really working out, I struggle to not eat in the morning, or, I really need to eat around the time that I'm working out, and I tend to work out earlier in the day. I have really decided that what works for me is not necessarily fasting, extended fasting, but of just trying to quit eating earlier in the evening.
Right. Like not snacking past 7:00.
Right. Yeah.
I know when I'm working out, well, some people that we've talked with say work out fasted, and other people say eat something first. And I think it really depends on your body. Everyone's different.
Yeah. And I can do some things when I'm fasted, but if I'm really working hard, I notice that I begin to feel the effects of not having eaten.
Right, right. Well, you burn your carbohydrates, the glucose that you have available in your system, and the next thing you know,
yeah, you're
feeling lightheaded. You're hitting the,
Yes.
It just depends what kind of workout I guess you're doing too, right? I guess like everything, it depends, right?
Yep, it sure does. But at any rate, I thought the whole anti-inflammatory, healing your body, I thought that was just very interesting, and she has a very inspiring story of. Yeah, she certainly improved her health.
Yeah, I'd really like to read her book.
Yes. And I was also interested about life in Nepal. That was interesting.
Right. Very interesting. Very different than what I'm used to. That's for sure.
Yes. Well, I would love to hear what our listeners have to say about our conversation with Karín. Let us know if you've tried intermittent fasting or following a plant-based diet.
Yes, we'd love to hear about how that worked for you and what happened. I'm also curious if anyone has dealt with inflammation through diet and fasting, and, how that worked out for them.
If you want to share your thoughts with us, please leave a message at our website, becomingellie.com, or at any of our social media sites. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Pinterest, YouTube, Mastodon, and LinkedIn.
And if you go to our website, be sure to sign up for the newsletter, and that way you'll know what's going on in our world. And also, please join our Becoming Ellie private Facebook group.
Yes, we'd love to have you join us. Oh, and if you enjoyed the podcast, please tell a friend. We would appreciate that.
Yeah, it's been good talking with you today, Jill. See you on the next podcast episode of Fit Strong Women Over 50.
Bye.
Bye-bye.